welcome. The government has spoken through the Finance Minister, and now to get a sense of what India Inc. makes of this budget, because ultimately if the India growth story is to bounce back on the back of the pandemic, India Inc. needs to start investing, needs to show some animal spirits. What's the general mood in India Inc. at this moment, and where do things stand after this union budget? Joining us on this India Today CII Budget Roundtable, I want to welcome first TV Narendran, Managing Director and Chief Executive at Tata Steel, President of CII. With us is Sanjeev Bajaj, Chairman Managing Director of Bajaj Finserv. Pawan Munjal joins us, Chairman and CEO of Hero MotoCorp. We've got Sanjeev Puri, Chairman Managing Director of ITC Limited. Chandrajit Banerjee joins us, Director General of CII. And Dr. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw is with us. So this is a heavyweight panel of industry titans, and we'll get their sense of their reading of the state of the Indian economy at this moment, about the policy moves announced by the Modi Sarkar and what impact this would have on the India growth story. Let me go across to TV Narendran first. The government is hoping, not just through enhancing capital expenditure by about 35%, but through the kind of stability that the government is signaling, and because the pandemic is hopefully now drawing to an end, that India Inc. will start investing aggressively in the India story. As the President of CII, your thoughts, Mr. Narendran, at the start of the show on the mood in the industry on the back of the budget?
Thanks, Rahul. I think when we spoke to our members at the National Council in December, the sentiment was certainly quite positive. Most of our members said that the capacity utilization was high. They were planning to invest more in the year ahead than they had done in the past. They were planning to hire more. So overall, the sentiment was positive. There was some concern about the third wave, which was just emerging at that time. But it looks like the worst is behind us on the third wave. And I think as industry sees demand growth, profitability growth, deleveraging of balance sheets, investment is coming back. And I think some sectors have already announced significant investments. The metal sector, for instance. Chemicals is another area where announcements have been made. So I think we are on track, and the Finance Minister's focus on the infrastructure, focus on policy stability will give private sector the confidence to invest.
Mr. Pawan Munjal, initially on account of the second wave, then on account of the third wave, India Inc. was in a wait and watch kind of zone. Capacity utilization in the 70s, not yet at a stage where there's a visible appetite to go out and invest more across industry. What's your sense of the mood in India Inc. on the back of what's been said in the budget and on the back of where things are in the economy right now?
On the back of the budget, Rahul, clearly, I would say it is upbeat. All of us are saying the same thing. All of us are saying it's a progressive and a very growth-oriented budget. Now, we want to see that investment, the capex flowing into infrastructure, generating employment, money coming into the hands of the people, and they start spending, which then in turn will incentivize industry to come back and invest. So that is the cycle that I see. But I'm very hopeful all of this will happen sooner rather than later.
Sanjeev Bajaj, one of the interesting things in this budget is, rather than diffusing government expenditure across multiple schemes by marginally increasing allocation to different sectors, the Finance Minister has chosen to contract in several areas and to expand substantially where the government at this moment thinks is important. For example, pipe water, or for example, government capex. Do you think this is a better strategy? Instead of diffusing your firepower, concentrate in the hope of demonstrating tangible results?
Rahul, not only is it a question of concentrating the firepower, but it's also a question of applying it or investing in investments which will have a long-term benefit on growth and hence employment. So if you see this significant increase, 35% increase that everybody now is talking about in infrastructure in various areas, it takes time, but even the money that was spent in the current year, we will see benefits of that coming in now. It should help in expanding the economy. It should help in additional job creation. Some numbers were given in the budget. It should help thereafter in consumption as well. So what they've decided to do is, and obviously it's in their estimate, that concentrating this, as you have said, in a few key areas is going to give that force multiplier.
But one of the other big challenges has been the inability to spend. In the previous year, if you look at the government's announcements on the kind of spendings they hope to make and compare that with what actually got spent, the government wasn't able to achieve, Sanjeev Puri, the targets that they'd laid out for themselves when it came to spending. Now, part of that is on account of the pandemic, which made it difficult to execute things, and part of it was because they didn't want expenditure to rise and the fiscal deficit to become unmanageable. Are you hoping that these claims that have been made about how much the government will spend will actually be delivered on the ground and won't just be an unmet promise?
So, Rahul, if you first of all step back and see that this budget reflects continuity of vision and strategy. So when there is continuity, I think the execution certainly gets better. And really there is also a vision behind the infrastructure model that India is going to create around the Gati Shakti. And that master plan is not that is under preparation, has been envisioned. So given that the strategy and path is clear, I certainly expect that the execution will be far greater. And even I would say in the last year, given the challenges of the pandemic, and remember last year had two waves, had the impact of the second and the third wave. So despite that, I think the progress, I would say, is quite encouraging. And I'm quite hopeful that it will only get better as we go forward.
TV Narendran, the other trend that we are picking up very clearly is the government shunning from big, bold announcements to conservatism and stability, which in some senses takes some of the thrill away from the budget, but also ensures that there are no nasty surprises or bouncers on the Sitharaman pitch. And therefore, is that, in your view, just generally the more sensible approach? You don't need good or bad surprises. Continuity and predictability is actually better to enable companies like yours to plan what they hope to do in the years to come?
You know, this is something which potential investors from overseas have always told us. You know, they want policy stability and they can deal with higher costs as long as there's policy stability. So I think that's important to make sure that we don't flip-flop, we move in the direction that we want to move into. The second point I want to make is increasingly the budget is becoming more about setting directions, highlighting the focus. It's not as if nothing happens between the budgets. There are oftentimes a lot of game-changing kind of announcements or initiatives even between the budgets. So I don't think we should assume that the budget is the only place where these announcements can be made. And some of the announcements, particularly the long-term direction-setting ones, are being made in the budget. But that doesn't stop the government from doing what it wants to do between the budgets.
Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw is with us. She's tweeted today to say middle classes are disappointed with the budget. The pandemic impact has badly hit the informal sector, MSMEs and the services sector. They are in urgent need of fiscal stimulus. Never one to hold back. Do you think the government failed in its duty to provide some kind of financial support and relief to MSMEs, the service sectors and the informal sector?
Well, you know, Rahul, the main reason I feel that this is a sector that does feel neglected is because there has, been an impact of the pandemic on the, the services sector, the MSME sector, and of course, generally the informal sector. So whilst the huge investment that has been announced in capital expenditure, which will go towards infra projects, is likely to generate employment in the informal sector, I still believe the services sector and the MSME sector has, sort of experienced large layoffs and job losses. And in that respect, I think any kind of fiscal impetus or stimulus by way of, tax allowances for healthcare, because I know people have had to increase their out-of-pocket spends or their housing loans, etc., etc. I just think would have, been very welcome. It would have signaled a sort of a concern for this particular class of taxpayers.
Let me build on that thought with Sanjeev Bajaj and get his sense of whether the government should have, in your view, done more for the urban poor, for example. What the pandemic showed us last year is the inability of the government to get financial relief out in time to gig workers, to those who were in urban sectors but didn't have formal employment, who were completely dispossessed. They've spoken of setting up a high-level committee, but do you think there was urgent need for immediate support and relief which hasn't been given?
Yes, and that's why this was one of the suggestions of CII as well, is like we have the rural poor program in Manrega to do the same on the urban side. But if you look at it broadly and if you look at broader employment segments, Rahul, what is very clear with this government's action is that they don't go for the direct demand stimulation. They go through the supply side. That's what they did last year. They continue to do that this year. And it means that while you may not see immediate benefit of that, what you will hopefully see is continued long-term benefit. And that seems to be the position that the government has taken. And it is starting to have benefit from last year's investments. And hopefully you'll see continued benefit here as well.
On disinvestment, the fact that in previous years, the government set very high targets, which it wasn't able to achieve. On the morning of the budget, the government utilized only 7% of its target of 1.75 lakh crore rupees. This time, the target setting is far more conservative. Is that, Mr. Pawan Munjal, in your view, a good thing? Because it could signal two different things. One is that the government's just being conservative. The other is that the government's lost its mojo, or that they've come to the conclusion that given the state of the financial markets at this time, that this may not be the best time to go in for big bang disinvestment.
Well, unfortunately, the 2 years that we've gone through, the disinvestment has seen a setback. Having said that, they've recently done 2 big disinvestments, and the announcements around more of them coming up, whether it's LIC's IPO or it's BPCL and many more. I wish the government luck. I wish that they're showing conservatism, but actually looking forward to achieving much more.
TV Narendran, given the inability of the government to achieve its disinvestment targets in the past years, do you think they're being conservative, or are they secretly hoping to over-deliver? Which one do you think is more likely?
I think the government is realizing that obviously this journey takes some time. You need not only to have the right assets, but the right potential investors. So I think it's only fair that the government keeps setting a larger target than they've achieved in the previous year, aggressively larger than what they've achieved, other than what they planned for, and keep moving in this direction. Directionally is the right thing to do. These are assets where the capital has been spent but is not being put to good use. Private sector can unlock the value. The government can get the money and invest that in infrastructure, in health, in education. So I think it's the right thing to do directionally, and I'm sure the government is committed to it.
Okay, let's spend a moment on the services sector, where some relief has been given, but we're seeing from a lot of the hotel companies and people in the hospitality and travel sector, Sanjeev Puri, a sense of disappointment that in budget after the pandemic, or even in all the multiple press conferences the government did where economic stimulus was announced, not enough was done to enable the hospitality, travel, tourism sector to bounce back. Is that a fair reading?
Well, let me say for the first, it was good to hear the Finance Minister specifically allocate a specific sum for supporting the tourism sector and MSME sector for in terms of credit guarantee. Certainly, that is welcome. Yes, given the distress that the sector has gone through, I think there has been the expectation was somewhat higher. But I think at least there is one step forward. And as the economy is picking up, and we saw in Q3 that this sector also was starting to bounce back. So I'm quite hopeful also that as the economy is recovering now, the impact of the third wave is limited in that sense, that this sector will also progressively bounce back. And hopefully if there are things that are required along the path, and the whole aspect of agile planning was also spoken about. So in that respect, I hope whatever is required, the support will be forthcoming going forward.
There were announcements in support of the EV sector in the hope that you can expedite the speed at which electric mobility gets adopted in India. There are two ways of looking at it. One, that it is an inevitability and that's the direction in which we're headed. The other is that there's more hype, especially from some of the startups, than there is actual tangible action on the ground. Do you believe that this budget will help electric mobility in India get speeded up to the next gear?
I suppose that's a question to me.
Yes, Mr.
Rahul?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. I've been saying this. This is the only one direction that all of us have to move in. And most of us are already progressing in this direction, transitioning in this direction. And I'm of a firm belief that the announcements today in the budget will definitely support this cause towards electrification, towards a cleaner and a greener future. And also put together with all of this, the digitization that's also being talked about. I'm very happy with these announcements. I'm very bullish on electrification. Overall, under the umbrella of sustainability, which I personally am very, very big fan of, I believe all of this is the right move in the right direction.
The other thing which was highlighted by the Finance Minister this morning, Sanjeev Bajaj, was the record GST collections. And we've seen whether it is GST or it is tax collection, the government seeing some buoyancy in its revenue collections. Do you see this being sustainable? Do you think that GST has now come out of the hump in a way that we'll keep seeing the GST collection figures rise? Or do you just think that this is just a bit of a bounce back and may not continue to rise in the same way as it has over the past few months?
So Rahul, while we've seen record collections for January, but if you look at the last 6 months, we've seen a number of months with 130,000 crore plus GST collection. What this is showing is the resilience in the economy. The economy is coming back as long as we are able to control the pandemic so that there isn't panic on the streets, and as long as we can avoid or minimize the disruptions that go around with it. And the third wave, the handling of that has shown that we are able to do that. But we can't stop there. We have to keep anticipating and planning for the next possible wave. As long as we do that, businesses are going to stay open, employment generation is going to happen, economy is going to expand, and GST is going to get collected. So this is something that we have to stay focused on. And the last couple of quarters is showing us in many months that this is definitely possible.
Okay, it'll be interesting to get your thoughts, Mr. Puri, on whether you in particular and your sense of how the rest of India Inc. is seeing this, is anticipating that the pandemic is over and planning accordingly, or do you still hold back because you don't know what lurks around the corner, you don't know if there's another variant which will come to strike, which may lead to more restrictions, or do you essentially just think that this nightmare is now over?
Well, I don't think we can conclude that it's completely over. But certainly I think we have all got better at learning to live with it and deal with it. You see progressively from the impact on the first wave to the second to the third, we've been able to manage it much better. And I think we have all to accept it and learn to live with it. And vaccinations have progressed well. That is extremely encouraging, and India has led the way. And that also provides resilience to the economy, because people are vaccinated, and hopefully on account of that, the impacts of the infections, if at all somebody were to get it, is unlikely to be severe. So we are certainly much better placed to deal with it. The health infrastructure also is well prepared. So we have to kind of just learn to live with it and take the right kind of precautions when there is a wave, and hope for the best. I don't think we can assume that it's completely gone away. Perhaps it will become an endemic, or there could be another wave. That only time will tell.
Chandrajit Banerjee, as you speak to all the people you deal with on a daily basis across sectors, are CEOs and founders still in a wait and watch kind of zone, wanting to be certain that the pandemic is over? Or do you think that the much anticipated investment cycle, which is really critical to determining how India grows from here, will soon start playing itself out?
Hi, Rahul. Sorry, just some connection problem earlier. But yes, I think, last year when we saw the focus on infrastructure, public spending, and we saw major steps taken by the government in terms of taxation, simplification, and also moderation, there was this expectation of private investments kicking in, and then we were of course hit by the pandemic. I think the second wave was strong in terms of hitting the economy and the private sector, but today we find that we are out of it, and in any meetings, in any discussions that we are having with CEOs, we are looking we are clearly seeing signs of capacity utilization anywhere upwards of 70-75% in most of the sectors. And I think that this time, with this huge impetus on the infrastructure, once again, huge infrastructure focus, and also the focus with the capex, we see. With that 7.5 lakh crore, I find that the private investment, crowding in of the private investment, that's going to be triggered pretty soon. And I don't think it's any more wait and watch. There is certainty in the policy framing. There is certainty, and it's a future-oriented budget. There is a lot of emphasis on trends that we wanted to see, be it ease of doing business, be it the cost of doing business. So therefore, I don't think that there's going to be any wait and watch. And I would say that private sector investments coming in around in the sense that there's so much of opportunities coming in through this huge Gati Shakti, roadmap which has been announced today. I think if the implementation is well, which it should be outside of the budget, we should see private sector investment coming in pretty soon.
The government's been talking again and again about how the economy is now back at pre-pandemic levels. TV Narendran, do you think that's not really the right way of looking at things? Because it's not about the economy coming back to pre-pandemic levels. It's more importantly about whether the growth trajectory is back at pre-pandemic levels, which in any case was low. We were hoping to accelerate that. So that's really what we really need to be looking out for, rather than just thumping our chests and saying that the economy is now back above pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, in some sense, Rahul, what we need to do is to make sure that we have 8 to 10% growth for the next few years. And next year is really going to be the test of that capability or ability, because this year, whatever we are delivering is just to go back to where we were 2 years back. And as you said, pre-pandemic, we were growing at 5-6%, and that's not good enough, right? So we need to grow at 8 to 10%. I believe a lot of the investments that the government is making in infrastructure, focusing on PLI, focusing on exports, all this will help deliver that growth, because then we are not dependent just on domestic consumption. We're looking at the global markets. There are things which have changed. The world is also looking at India as a source. So in many ways, there are many things happening which is positive. Also the startups, because pre-pandemic, the startups were not as visible as they are today. And today you have 40-50 unicorns being added every year. So I think there are a number of things which have changed during the pandemic and compared to pre-pandemic. So what is important is to deliver 8% plus growth for the next few years so that we can head towards a 5 trillion economy we are all chasing.
Sanjeev Bajaj, the government introduced a 30% tax on all crypto assets. It was a chicken and egg situation. Do you legislate first or do you tax first? The taxes come first. The legislation is to presumably follow. Do you think that was the right approach on behalf of the government, that you go out and tax first, so that at least the government starts mopping some taxes from this and brings it into the formal economy rather than just allowing it to go in a black hole?
I believe in principle, if there is a gain, then there is a rationale to tax it. Whether that should come first, legislation should come first, I'm sure the legal eyes will keep debating that till sunset. But in principle, if you're making some money, you must pay some tax on it. So I think that's a fair thing for them to have done.
Chandrajit Banerjee, there's been so much buzz around crypto assets. The government has said today on a parallel note that there will be a digital currency. They haven't fully define the form that this digital currency will take, the utility have, how it will operate, but they've indicated that the RBI has been working on a digital currency. A digital rupee is likely to be introduced this year. How do you see that play out?
So I think this is a very, very important step, a very, very good announcement. That's why I said that the budget is future looking. It's really looking at things much beyond from the digital rupee using the blockchain technology as it was announced, online bill payment system and so on. I think this is something which is really going to take us this really enables us to move towards much more of cashless sort of transactions and encouraging digital transactions. So this is bringing in efficiency. This is bringing in a lot more in terms of sort of a future preparedness, global connected world. So I think this is going to be very, very important. 75 digital banking centers in 75 districts by scheduled commercial banks. These are all underscoring the government's intent to mobilize ourselves into sort of a more of a digital, if one can say, digital revolution. And I would really want to believe that this would see a rise in the use of products aimed at assisting business in digitizing as well as automating the documentation processes, video KYC onboarding solutions, digital stamping, digital signature. So this is really one big step towards digital India. And completely future focused.
Okay, so we'll take a very quick break. This India Today CII Budget Roundtable continues on the other side. We're back in a moment. Stay with us. In budgets in the past, there's generally been a heavy dose of populism, very visible manifestation of populism. This budget came in the middle of an election cycle, and yet Nirmala Sitharaman, to her credit, stayed away from any big, bold, populist announcements which involve a lot of expenditure, which may or may not happen later, but just is a good thing to say so that you can play to the gallery and get some claps. Do you see in that, Chandrajit Banerjee, a sense of increasing maturity, possible stability, predictability in terms of how the government is operating? It's set a certain parameter and wants to stay within those boundaries.
See, I think there has been, as you said, I don't see populism in it. I see this to be a popular budget, but not a populist budget, definitely not, in spite of the elections. So that shows the government's determination in terms of really making people understand and appreciate and get involved. And that's going to be very, very important. Good economics is at play. And I think good economics needs to be understood. Good economics needs to be also inclusive. And I think that's the way they have been approaching budget making, and which I appreciate in the sense, like when we look at the way Gati Shakti and infrastructure has been really looked upon, you see a lot of inclusivity over there. Inclusivity of different, we talk about the hinterland, we talk about the coastal region, we talk about villages. So there is a lot for everyone. If we can implement it well, with the point that I said first, you will find a lot happening in the rural sector. You will find a lot happening for people in the who are say in the rural economy, or for the people who there's a lot of job opportunities coming up through the budget. So there are possibilities of huge job creation through this budget, which obviously therefore will benefit the segment that you were talking about in a manner, but it can be done with good economics, and I think all that has been done with good economics. I see a higher outlay. When I was going through the fine print, I see a higher outlay towards healthcare. I see a higher outlay towards infrastructure, towards education. I also see significant areas where there has been sort of, if I can say, a prudent approach to subsidies. So I think these are very, very important, a progressive way a government could look at budget making. And I think that's what I appreciate, which includes everyone, yet not a sort of a populist type of a stuff which just gives away sops and which doesn't really at the end of the day help anyone. So this is the way to go.
Sanjeev Bajaj,
to create the jobs.
One of the fears highlighted by the economics survey was imported inflation. We're seeing what's happening with Brent crude prices internationally. We're seeing the strains between Russia and Ukraine. Given that, how much of a threat do you think imported inflation could potentially be to the India growth story in the months to come?
It clearly is a parameter, Rahul, to watch out for, while on the other side, if you see, CPI is something that is very much in control. Interestingly, over the last couple of years, our government, both on monetary and fiscal policy and stimulus, did not follow blanket what we saw developed countries do. RBI and the Finance Ministry, we saw coordinated quite closely and came out with a set of prescriptives that were relevant for us as an economy. And this will once again require close coordination between them going forward, because inflation is creeping up. We can see tightening of policies happening in various parts of the world. But we are also seeing our economy growing. As long as we can continue with growth and keep an eye on inflation and take moderate steps, that should hold us in good stead.
Mr. Munjal, what's the sense you pick up from the feedback that you're getting from the different showrooms, people trying to sell your products to consumers, about the mood amongst the general Indian consumer at this time?
Well, in our case specifically, there is a lot of rural focus, and unfortunately, in the recent past, rural markets have not been doing too great. So the mood is not so good right now. But as I said earlier, I mentioned that the focus on infra, the focus on rural, the focus on agri, all of this will definitely bring about a change in the sentiment. But also all the investment, once it goes in there, it's also going to bring money in the hands of the consumers, bringing the consumers back into the showroom. Albeit it will take some time, but we are headed in the right direction. And according to me, things should change for the better sooner rather than later.
Mr. Sanjeev Puri, one of the key components for the hospitality sector, the travel and tourism sector, is inbound travel. Given that the fear of the pandemic still prevails, there are still travel restrictions, that's unlikely to happen. So how could that impact the bounce back that your sector, whether it's restaurants, hotels, the travel sector, are pretty desperate now to see?
Well, the restrictions are, slowly being removed and reduced, and we are seeing progressive recovery for sure. See, a case in point is what we saw in the last quarter. The industry recovered quite well, and I think with vaccinations, the industry is better placed. Individuals are better placed to travel both for business and leisure. Of course, business had not picked up to the extent that it was pre-COVID, but leisure had certainly picked up quite well. And we are quite hopeful that as restrictions get removed, the recovery will happen. And, the reality is that in India, the outbound travel from India was much higher than the inbound. And I hope that given a lot of people in India who potentially may have been going out in the past have experienced what India has to offer, I believe that could be a positive for the tourism industry going forward, because India does have a lot to offer. Okay, and I think all the effort that is being made to trying the investments, the large increase in the infrastructure investments, digitization of the economy, making the economy competitive. As all of these economies pick up, I think that's kind of very good for the hospitality, the tourism industry as well.
Okay, this is where we wrap up this special conversation. We wanted a cross-sectoral sense of how India Inc. is seeing the state of the economy, the announcements in the budget, and what's likely to play out over the next several months. I want to thank our guests for joining us. We're slipping into a break. India Today and Business Today's live and continuing coverage of the booster dose budget will return on the other side of a very quick break. Stay tuned. Back in a moment.